Hello, I'm Sue Bose. Welcome to the Net Hero podcast. Wow, what a week it's been. We've just got over the Big Zero show, which was timed to coincide, obviously deliberately, with the general election. No, not at all. So a lot has happened in a week. A week is a long time in politics, not half. Before I go into my thoughts on where we are now with the new government and the state of net zero, just a quick recap. If you missed anything from the Big Zero show, if you weren't able to come, then you missed a great day. In fact, a great 2 days. Day one on business, day two on skills. And a lot of the material, if not most of it, will be available on futurenetzero.com. A few takeaways from that. We had a really great session from Chris Skidmore, who is talking about now where the government should go. He made a prediction, obviously, that Labour would win, not a difficult prediction. He also announced that he would be voting for Labour because of their net zero plans. But obviously, there's big questions marks rely on the investment that's required. We then had a couple of great sessions looking at emissions from Nick Molden, talking about what really makes a clean form of transport. And it might not be what you think, which is a simple switch to EVs, plenty more on that. And Vicky Price, the leading economist, gave her take on where funding needs to be. So I'd urge you to have a look at all that content over the next couple of weeks. It'll be coming up on futurenetzero.com. We'll also share it on social media. And a big thank you to everyone who came along to the show in Coventry, and of course to the team here for putting it on. Now let's go to what happened pretty much the day after the show ended. So we went to the polls and we now have a Labour government. Now, you could say 172 seat majority, pretty much the biggest since Tony Blair's landslide of 1997, means, wow, the country wanted to go Labour. I don't think that's really the case. And I'm going to be very sort of honest in my opinions. I think the Conservatives lost this election rather than Labour won it. The share of the vote amongst Labour voters is lower than it was when Jeremy Corbyn went to the polls in 2019. And I think people were fed up with the Tory government. A lot of inaction, clearly, on many various points. But that leaves us where we are, which is a de facto supermajority for Labour, which means it can do pretty much what it likes for the next 5 years for sure. So where does that leave us with net zero and energy? Now, if you've been paying attention, and who would blame you if you haven't, then all the manifestos were published. We can bin Lib Dems, we can bin the Tory, we'll look at what Labour promised and what they're about to do. But there is one point that has to be made about what's happened in this election. If you look at the share of the vote, there was an increase in the share of the vote for Greens, and Greens now have more MPs than they've ever had before. There's also quite a massive upshift in the Lib Dems, and of course the Lib Dems have quite a lot to say on energy and net zero. In fact, the former Energy Secretary, now obviously the leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, said that Labour should nick some of their ideas and move faster. Well, let's see what they've done in the first few days of government. Well, number one, they've appointed someone we've seen before. Ed Miliband is the Secretary of State for DESNZ. I'm sure it'll probably change its name, but energy security and net zero. Well, what do I think about Ed? Well, I'd like to get him on, see what he says. I wasn't convinced by his time before as either Labour leader or when he was in charge of the energy secretary when it was DEC. He's got to get some decisions right and very quickly. Number one, what the hell is Great British Energy? So if you look at the agenda, one of the main things that Labour said is that they were going to create 650,000 jobs. They were giving us energy independence from the price hikes, and they were going to create something called GB Energy. Now, nearly 5-6 days in to this government, I have no idea what it is. No one I know in the sector has no idea what it is. And you'd kind of think if this is the flagship policy, then we would have had something from Ed Miliband or Starmer by now. Now, by the time this comes out, on Wednesday, maybe there'll be a change and I'll be eating humble pie. But at present, I can't see them coming up with anything because I don't think they really know what it is. I think the ambition is great. I think the idea of having, some way of owning assets is brilliant, but we haven't got the money. So I do worry about where the funding model for Great British Energy will be. But let's talk about the things that they have done. Well, the most striking thing is onshore wind. Rachel Reeves has just announced that she's going to tear up the planning rules and she's going to fast track planning, not just for housing, but obviously for energy. Now, on the surface, that sounds great news, because if you're going to try and get the grid to be decarbonised by 2030, which is now Labour's ambition, you need to build a shed load of wind turbines and a shed load of pylons. The problem is people don't really like them. Now, some companies, you'll have heard the stuff lately from Octopus saying, yeah, this is great, and the public really want lots of wind turbines. Again, I'm not so sure that is the case. In certain areas, perhaps, but there's no doubt we do need to speed up the planning regulations. So I think this is a welcome push. Again, there's no details, and you probably wouldn't expect it so early on in the life of this new government. But there are some fundamental parts of planning law that will have to be shifted. What do you do when a community objects to a wind turbine or a bunch of pylons going through their land? How do you ensure that we keep one of the most important things, which is biodiversity and biosecurity, maintained? Because whatever we say, we've got to dig this land up. We're going to have to pour lots of concrete. We're going to have to build things made of metal and plastics, and there's an environmental effect. There's lots of stuff on bird migrations. There's lots of stuff on kind of the work that goes on in putting these things in with their concrete footprints. Now, we've probably not seen any of that because most of us don't get on a boat and go out offshore. But that's been going on for the last 10 years. If we suddenly have a massive expansion of offshore wind, it'll be very evident what's going on. And that brings us to the idea of how you can balance the rights of society, because we all need this clean energy and we need this infrastructure, with the rights of people who live in the areas where this is happening. And I think this is going to be a tricky balance for Labour to deal with. So on the face of it, I love it, because obviously it's ridiculous that you could spend maybe a decade in planning for an offshore wind farm development, and who knows for onshore wind. But as I said, the biodiversity, the issue of disrupting people where these things are going to be built, I think they will be significant hurdles that will be difficult for Labour to get over. The other thing that is not really being talked about at present is that there are loads of people employed in the current oil and gas industry. And if you've been reading Energy Live News or Future Net Zero, you've seen in the past some of the big unions really worried about what will happen to their members. Now, Labour will have an issue of balancing what the unions want in these kind of dying industries of the fossil fuel sector, because if they really want to be serious about their plans, they really have to accelerate the end of oil and gas. That is easier said than done, because at present we still need a shed load of gas and we are still undersupplied and we don't have enough storage. So that brings me on to the point about kind of labour relations, i.e. Labour being the people and the unions, and what will happen in all of this. I think Labour's going to have a proper sit down with the unions and try and get them on board. And that'll definitely be, I think, a job for Miliband to do, because you've got to get the buy-in from the unions in these sectors. They can transfer skills, all right? People who have been engineers building offshore oil rigs can certainly turn their hands to building floating jackets and floating wind farms. But there's got to be time for that. We've also got to look at how we improve what we're doing around our energy security, and all these things will take quite a long time to build. So planning, great. Labour relations, I think, will be a big issue. Let's then talk about some of the other things that have been purported and what the industry wants. Now, there isn't much money in the tank, as we all know. So what Labour is looking to do is say, we as a government, we are going to give you some certainty, and we want you as the private sector to invest. Now, the private sector does have plenty of money. There's plenty of money out there. I don't care what people say. You talk to the investment houses, you see what's going on, and they do need something. But they're not going to back something where there's any dilly-dallying, where there's change of motion and movements, and they need to see the government putting skin in the game. Just today, at the time of recording, the Scottish Renewables and the renewable sector has said the government needs to up the level of contracts for difference payments, CFDs. If you don't quite know what that are, that's basically like, I'm going to build a wind farm. You will say to me as the government, hey, I know you're going to be paying a lot of money to build it. We'll give you a 15-year generally contract, which says the difference between the cost of sort of building it, which is kind of what they call the strike price, and the reference price, the price of energy, we'll pay you for that, so that you get certainty that you're going to get paid and we don't have to cough up the upfront investment. It's a good idea, and definitely it's been one that's been an instrument since electricity market reform came in sort of 2010, 2013 time. But the problem has been there hasn't been enough confidence for people to bid for it. So Labour's job will be have to give private firms the confidence to say, yes, we will go for this, and we need a decent price for us to get the guaranteed return for us to invest in it. No word yet on nuclear either. I think Labour will have to go with more and carry on with the Tory plans on nuclear. Without nuclear, I cannot see us getting anywhere near the net zero targets. And I know a lot of people will be so against it, but in my view, you need a balance of it. I'll be interested to hear what they're thinking about regarding carbon capture. Again, an area that the Tories were looking at, and I think is absolutely vital for our pathway to net zero. If we don't do carbon capture, if we don't do more in terms of carbon storage or sequestration, we'll never get there. Carbon removals is a new technology. We discussed it at the Big Zero show. And I think carbon removals, rather than carbon capture, whatever you want to call it, that will become a central plank of our pathway to net zero. And it will need government investment for the companies that are going to put the money behind it. So we need some clarity on that pretty soon. Money. It's always the one. One of the things that's in the manifesto is something called the Green Prosperity Plan. And what it says is that the government will team up with investors and create something called the National Wealth Fund. Again, nothing on it so far. A good idea in principle, because what it says is we're going to create a funding block which will then allow investment bodies to invest. You put your money in as a private company. This fund will help and back it, and you'll get there quicker, and you'll get there more value for us, the consumer. This fund needs to be set up soon, in my view, because you're not going to get anyone investing when there's a lot of concern around what Labour's fiscal policies will be, what it'll do to pension funds, all of that at present. All of this is very, very early days, and I'm sure it'll probably get worked out, but you kind of need to see some strong signals around this creation of this fund and exactly who will run it, how it'll be run, how it'll divest money, and how it'll attract funding from the private sector. One other thing I noticed is Patrick Vallance. You remember him? One of the Chuckle Brothers, as they were called, when it came to COVID. Well, he's a very, very well-renowned scientist. He is now a Minister for Science. I think that's a good appointment. I think he's a very kind of, measured person who'll look at things rightly. And this is the other part that we've not really talked about. We've had kind of, the Faraday battery challenge. We've looked at sort of technologies. We are brilliant in this country at pushing forward the boundaries, and we need a shed load of science, as they say. We've got to science the crap out of it to get us to net zero. we need more investment in universities. We need more investment in bright sparks, trying to work out new technologies that will help us cut emissions. And I think he could be someone that, can sort of push that forward. So a decent appointment. 650,000 jobs. It could be a lot more than that, but obviously that's a big target. It's going to be one that Labour will need to show some progress on pretty quickly. But I guess in summary, my view is very simple. Words are cheap. Actions are often very, very difficult. Let's see what happens over the next kind of months. I would hope by the autumn we should have some of these questions answered. We should have a clear strategy for what's going on with onshore wind. We should have a clear strategy around nuclear. We should know what's happening with hydrogen. We should know what's happening with this National Wealth Fund. And we should be able to see that the markets, and particularly the private sector major players, are feeling confident enough to invest. My final take before I go is the 2030 target. That's a hell of a target. To decarbonise the grid within 5 years, I find it hard to believe. Now, it can be done. Again, Chris Kidmore was at our show and he said, I believe it could be done at a real stretch, but you need real energy from the government, to pardon the pun. You need the government to really push the envelope, backing investment, easing, cutting the red tape, and allowing private sector companies to feel comfortable that there's a stable framework to do this. And then there's the resourcing element, the actual number of people to do it. We've got a massive skills shortage. We don't have enough engineers. If I suddenly said, right, let's go and get 10,000 people to be EV engineers, no chance tomorrow, right? So we've got a skills gap, we've got to have an investment gap, and then we've got to find a technology gap, all to be filled to hit this 5-year target. I'm not saying it can't be done, but we've been sluggish, to say the least. And all of this is set against, unfortunately still, a very mixed global political landscape, economically and obviously militarily. So a lot of issues for this new government to get to grips with. We will do a catch-up on this. My plan is to create a series of programmes in autumn time, looking at 100 days of the government. So stay tuned, we'll give you some more details on that. There's my take. You might disagree with me. You might think I'm being completely pessimistic. I'm not. I think it's a lot of good things that could happen for the net zero sector, but I do advise a lot of caution and I want to see some action quite quickly. I'll more than happily chat to Ed Miliband if he's willing to come on this show and give us an idea of what Labour wants. So we'll put a call out to him. Let me know what you think. Subscribe, get involved. Thank you for supporting the podcast. We've had 35,000 downloads, which is amazing. We'd like to keep going. We'd like to have you on the podcast. So get involved. Follow us on social media. Tell your friends and colleagues to subscribe. And if you want to be on it, it's nethero@futurenetzero.com. Next week's podcast, I'll be talking to a policy expert. What else? From the Grantham Institute for Climate Change, who will be taking us through what he thinks the policy levers will be, and let's see whether he agrees with what I've said. Thanks for watching. Catch you soon.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.